Hello again, Rabbi.
Hello, Joe.
Once again, I see you are out in the wilderness enjoying the silence, but I'm recently become aware at least notice more often these days that when you're not in the wilderness enjoying the silence, you're bombarded on almost every side by people who are talking and using conversation that seems less and less, as my grandmother would say, fit to get your mouth washed out with soap, and a big bar of soap at that. And it used to be shocking to hear somebody say something even remotely implied as being inappropriate. And now we have politicians, we have entertainers, and it seems you can get away with more and more. I blame HBO, but it's not just the private channels. It's public forums, it's public speakers, it's language. Kids in school, where do they get these mouths that they have on them? What's happened to society? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, just this past week or 2 weeks, a past president of the United States called another leader of a foreign country with the F word. Totally inappropriate, totally against Jewish and Christian values and ethics. And I would say that to my Christian listeners. It's not acceptable, and we shouldn't accept it. And I'm not advocating censoring. I'm not saying that, we have to bleep words. The word shouldn't be there to be bleeped to start with. So let's take a look at the Talmud. And so let's start with the 10 Commandments. That's a good place to start. One of the commandments is often misunderstood, translated, or interpreted. The commandment says, you shall not use God's personal name in an oath. God's personal name in an oath. Because of that commandment, we do not pronounce God's name anywhere. We don't pronounce it. We say Lord, Adonai. We have a substitute word for God's personal name. That's all it says. It's not talking about vulgarity. It's not talking about curse words. It says, don't use God's personal name. Just like you talk to me as, Rabbi, and you may call someone doctor. We use titles often to show respect. How much the more so, we're not going to pronounce God's personal name. So let's get that out of the way. The commandment isn't about everyday language. Don't say God's personal name. Done. Next, we're turning to the Talmud for some guidance. The Talmud teaches that as long as you're the average guy, you're the average citizen, you're just a Joe. If you want to use whatever language you want to use around the table, that's up to you and your family. You and your family have to decide what's disrespectful, what's vulgar. It's private. It's in your home. When you leave your home, we'll now come up to another level, the second level. We're now in a public setting. What language does the public, how should I present myself in a public setting? Okay, then the Talmud says there's the next level. You become an officer of your bowling league, of your homeowners association. You have now become a public figure. You are now responsible for cleaner language. And as you move up the ladder, you are an ambassador for that office. And you want to give the office dignity. And language that you could use around the dinner table is not acceptable from the president or the past president of the United States. It's not acceptable because of the office, because that person has agreed to rise above common vulgarities.
But isn't it true, to hearken back to your comment on a former president, that part of his attraction was that he was speaking the language of the common man? And I'm not necessarily using common in the best way when I say that.
Yes, so you can respect the common man, you can represent the common man. You don't use coarse common language that we've all agreed is inappropriate for the office. It's one thing if you're under the sink and you have your wrench and you scrape your knuckles, or you're working on the car and you touch a hot manifold, that a vulgar word comes out of your lips. Perfectly understandable. But you don't punctuate with it. You don't use it. And it doesn't belong in the public forum. And again, the Talmud points that out. The language isn't wrong. It just doesn't belong there. And each of us has a responsibility. As a parent, how do you want your child to behave in public? They're going to mimic you. If you use a certain language at the dinner table, your kids are going to use it out there. Do you want them to? Do you want them to call their neighbors names that you're using? Just ask yourself that. I'm not judging anybody. If it's okay in your home, then you think it's okay for your child to say that? If you think it is, all right, you think it is. That's you. And as we move up into different positions and jobs, there is certain reasonable expectations of language. And we want to keep coming back to what's appropriate outside the home in a public forum.
But who determines the standard? That's the hard question.
I think the standard is, we can tell what it is because it changes through the centuries. It's what's generally accepted. Would it be okay for your mother to use this language? I think that's come up with some criteria. Would you want to hear your mother saying those things? If it's okay, then it's okay. I think we have to control ourselves. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. Just because I can say certain words doesn't mean I should say those words. I have to exhibit some self-control and say, I wouldn't want to hear my mother saying that to me. I wouldn't want my child to say that to the neighbor. Therefore, I'm not going to say it because I don't want them to present that way in the public forum.
What I always mention when I hear members of my family, I'm looking at my daughter, use words that I don't approve of, I say, oh, it's okay for you to say that in the house if you really want to, but if you get into the habit of saying it, one of these days you're going to be in public or at another person's house, and you're going to say that word without thinking, and then you're going to regret it.
I think that's great advice. Now I'm adding what the Talmud said is, it's one thing if you say it to the neighbor while you're mowing the lawn. It's another while you're past president of the United States. The Talmud is very explicit. As we have become more public figures, as we represent, as rabbi, as teacher, as a president, as a prime minister, the Talmud says you have a responsibility. If you don't want it, don't become. Don't take the office if you're not going to respect other people and respect what's appropriate language and how you talk about other people.
Well, I always appreciate your language and how you talk about other people, Rabbi, but mostly I enjoy just talking to you. Thank you again.
And I want to admit, I really enjoy you listening to me. Thank you, Joe.